he told me where he was going. Then I really knew from that response that this was a relationship unraveling and unraveling rapidly. Because for you to tell that to someone.
Hello there, I'm Nicki Dennis, and welcome back to Positive Vibes. Some storms hit without warning, and they can leave you standing in a life you barely recognise. Today's guest, Clover Taylor Johntson, knows that reality all too well. Just weeks after giving birth to her second daughter, and in the aftermath of a catastrophic hurricane, Clover's marriage ended abruptly. No closure, no plan, and no consistent support. But instead of letting bitterness take root, Clover chose something braver: healing over hurt, faith over fear, and action over victimhood. Now, as a co parenting coach and founder of the Co Parent Accelerator Transformation Program, she helps women rise from heartbreak, navigate co parenting with grace, and rebuild a life filled with peace and purpose. Her motto says it all: it's hard to be fruitful while you're holding on to hurtful. Clover, welcome to Positive Vibes. We're so glad to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me, and I am delighted to be here.
We're delighted to have you too, Clover. So, there's always a background, as we've heard in the intro, to people's life. Can you take us back to that moment in your life? What was it in the early days after your marriage had ended?
Okay, so I'm going to start a little before that
Yeah.
because I think it's important for us sometimes to set a context,
Mm,
even though at that time you may not have recognized it,
yes.
but looking back. So, looking back, a few things had happened. My then husband had lost his job. I think he was made redundant from a job that he was, and
Mm-hmm.
he prized his job. So, it was a part of his identity.
Mm,
But when you lose your job, if you are a committed partner, you should recognize that your focus should be on getting back in the game.
mm,
And I remember saying to him, because by then I was maybe 6, 7 months pregnant at the time. And I said to him, we were living in Jamaica at the time, I said, um, the kids from the universities will soon be out. And when that happens, you will be competing with them. So it's in your best interest to try to get back in the game before all of that happens. Anyway, he seemed unconcerned, despite my advice. Looking back, and when everything added up and I got the full picture and weave it together, it appears, and it's more than appear, it's a fact that he had also gotten involved in a relationship, the
mm.
extent of which I do not know. But I always say if we dig deep enough, there is always the denial and the deceit and then the devastation. So even though I didn't know it at the time, that was also playing into the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
I was very focused on keeping my health so I could safely deliver a healthy child because I too had been switched from an area in banking that I was well accustomed to a very unfamiliar environment where I was learning a completely new aspect of banking.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a little bit of a challenge on the work end for me. So when I get home in the evenings, it was just having dinner, relaxing, and going to bed, just living one day at a time.
Mm.
And then came a time when the stress was so overwhelming that the doctor actually sent me to hospital for bed rest for a week. Fast forward, he didn't get back a job. This hurricane came. And while it was a physical, geographic disaster, I could apply the same to what eventually ensued in my personal life.
Mm-hmm.
So even though the relationship started unraveling right after the hurricane, because you can imagine he has no job. I'm on maternity leave with pay, fortunately for me.
Mm.
The roof of the house, like many in that tropical cyclone, was just ripped off. And I remember holding my 5-week-old baby and
Oh.
watching the rain pouring down the sunken living room. And I just said to myself, what on earth? I mean, total shock, just total shock, bewilderment. Anyway, you live through these things one moment at a time.
Mm.
So it happened during the daytime. So that was one positive of the disaster.
Mm.
I had a neighbor who was a good friend, and she said to me, well, my house has not been damaged to that extent, and the bedrooms are okay. So why don't you all come and hang out with me? So we did for that night. And I had a relative who was close by who also was living in a brand new townhouse almost. So they didn't get the brunt of anything except loss of telephone service. So the following day, he took myself and the two children over there. And when I thought that he was going to say, okay, see you later, I said, oh, what are you doing? And he said, I'll never forget these words. There are some words people tell you that you will never forget them. Where I am going, you can't come.
Oh.
Wow. Anyway, he told me where he was going. Then I really knew from that response that this was a relationship unraveling and
Mm.
unraveling rapidly. Because for you to tell that to someone who is your wife with still in postpartum and another young kid who is waiting to go to kindergarten, that was really extreme insensitivity
Mm.
at best. Anyway, I spent a couple of days there. My family was living away from the city. So we had to wait for telephone services to be restored, to be able to communicate with them. Luckily, my mom was also with me, but she stayed with another neighbor who was also a friend. So within about 3 days, they were able to come and collect us. That's
Mm.
me, myself, and the two kids. So we went to my parents. Both of them were alive, and I was there for a month. I didn't hear from him.
Mm.
And my infant daughter, shortly after we arrived there, she started having swallowing difficulties. My brother said to me, let me take you to my pediatrician because we had kids of similar ages. And he did. And the pediatrician looked at me and said, yes, she actually has throat ulcers, probably
Yeah.
something airborne, but you're just going to have to wait for a week for it to disappear. And my eyes popped open. I felt like a gut punch. And I said, what? Anyway, my brother was so encouraging. He
Mm.
said to me, I am going back to the city tomorrow, and I suggest you come along with me, take her, and we'll go to your pediatrician for a second opinion. And we did exactly that. And when I arrived, she said to me, yes, the infant, the baby, she has throat ulcers, but I'm not going to handle this for you. I'm going to just recommend that you go down to the ENT specialist, which was just walking distance because it was in a hospital complex.
Yeah.
So I took her there and he treated her for it. And within about 5 to 7 days, she was able to start eating fully again.
Mm.
Um, During that period, I had also connected with my then husband and told him what was the situation and that I would be visiting. And, if he wished, he could show up. Well, he didn't. So life continued in
Mm.
that in that vein.
Yeah. So, Clover, That's an extraordinary background of what you were dealing with, but it was one thing on top of another. You've had a hurricane disaster, your house has been destroyed, you're postpartum, dealing with a newborn, you've got another young child, your husband virtually tells you he's not coming back or he's leaving you, and then you're dealing with the illness of your newborn. And this is all after the hurricane aftermath. What kept you moving forward?
Yes, I often wonder. Well, what kept me moving was the fact that I was totally focused on staying well
Mm,
and keeping my children healthy because I couldn't afford to go under because where would their well-being
yeah.
go? There would be no one to care for them and to support them. And I'm sure looking back, my 5-year-old would have been having, even if she didn't understand fully what was going on, she probably was going through some level of anxiety.
Mm,
So, for every one of us, there is going to be an opportunity for us to lean in to move forward. I
mm,
made I made my children the focus, but faith was my lifeline. It's the
mm,
life vest I chose to put on,
yeah.
despite the fact that I had to do all the swimming.
Mm,
And here's what I will say for myself. I was fortunate in that I grew up in a traditional home with Christian parents, parents that, reflected the Christian ethics of love your neighbor as yourself.
mm,
And they were very practical in the help that they showed to other people. And above all, they put family first.
mm,
So that foundation was definitely fundamental to how I responded and how I handled what was facing me.
mm,
And I leaned into my faith like I had never done before. And like I always say to anybody who is struggling with whatever the heartbreak, because for me, heartbreak was the departure of a husband or the checking out or the disengagement at a time when I needed him most and my kids needed
mm,
him most. But for somebody else, it could be suicide of a family member.
yeah.
It could be a devastating car crash that leaves somebody paralyzed. So for everyone, that shows up differently. But
Mm,
my point is, we have a choice either to look ahead or to look behind. And when you look behind, you're basically signing an agreement with your past that's just going to become baggage. But if
mm,
we look forward and find a source and a framework that can help to bring healing, that is the preferred process. So I opted for that and I really dug into my faith. And I
mm,
had a group, what I call my Whoville, my little inner circle of friends who really showed up for me
mm,
without me asking them. So some people would come and just drop by to see if the children needed anything.
yeah.
Others would take me to prayer meetings. Others would just offer
Yeah.
to just give you a break.
Yeah.
So I was extremely fortunate in that respect.
Mm,
And I recognized that no one was coming to save me.
mm,
There's no one. That people can walk the journey with you, but you have to walk it for yourself.
mm,
So I leaned into my healing. And your healing it's internal,
mm,
it's personal, and it has to be intentional. Your
mm,
healing is never going to happen without intention and the decision.
mm.
So I definitely, looking back, that was my perspective.
Yeah.
And
I was just going to ask with your healing, the first few months would have been one of the hardest months. What was that emotionally like for you? I know you saying you've got had good supports, good foundations from your family upbringing and you had your faith, but what was the hardest part emotionally in those first few months for you?
it was extremely hard.
Mm,
And what I must say stood out in my mind was the level of insomnia that I suffered.
mm,
I was normally a heavy sleeper. I could just jump in the bed and in a twinkling of an eye, I
mm.
would be asleep. No,
Yeah.
insomnia. I was dogged by insomnia. It just wouldn't give me for a break. And that went on for months. And also from an emotional standpoint, I lived in shock. I
Yeah.
couldn't believe that anybody could do such an irresponsible, right? Even if you check
Mm,
out and say, okay, I don't want to be with her anymore, but to just totally check out
yeah.
and disengage from being the dad you are supposed to be, that was beyond shocking for me.
Mm,
Because, as I said, because of the family environment I came from and the family structure, I had just never seen that kind of behavior to infant children. So for me, looking back, I name it child abuse because it's as if you really abandoned your children.
mm,
That's the bottom line. So I now call it for what it is. And I remember when the landlady, because the house was owned by two older ladies, and my next door neighbor was also an older lady who could have been my mom at the time. And they had asked me to come and look at the repairs and to see if everything was going according to schedule so that I could move back in to get back to work. And when I went next door to my neighbor and just to greet her and everything, and she said to me, and this also has stuck with me. She said to me, "Oh, I saw your husband come by the house, but he tells me he's not coming back."
yeah.
And I was even more shocked because while I know the relationship did look shaky at this point, but for you to tell the neighbor
Mm,
before you tell me. So when you say it happened without closure, it really did.
mm,
And this brings another perspective to a situation like that, this. You're also in a grieving process, right? Because the relationship has ended, but there is no closure. And I know I'm not the only person in this boat. So you languish in a period of extended grief on top of everything else that's going on.
mm,
And while I had support, there are many people who wouldn't have that level and who don't have that level of support.
mm,
And so for them, it becomes even more extended and they suffer with this disenfranchised grief because, as a society in general, we don't see grief being associated with breakup and divorce in the way that we see it associated with death,
mm,
even though it is on the scale of the most devastating
mm,
emotional issues that anyone can face. It
mm.
it it ranks at about number three,
Yeah.
right?
And
So
it is a death of a relationship. Mm,
it absolutely
mm,
it is the death of a relationship. And with
mm,
the death of a relationship comes death of expectations
mm,
that you had hoped. You're also, it's the death of the family identity that you had,
mm.
right? So
Yeah.
all these dreams and hopes that you had wrapped up in this family relationship, those are all gone. And
Mm,
so for many of us, this grief season is very extended. And in addition to the grief season that we are going through, we are almost naturally, as women, from what I've seen in my interactions with clients and Facebook groups and all of that, is that our go-to emotion is there are two: fear and shame.
mm,
Because women are conditioned to believing, for the most part, it's changing, but not rapidly enough, is that when a relationship fails, it's the woman who is responsible for nurture, and therefore that level of judgment, women tend to feel that it's more focused on them than it is focused on the man in the relationship. And for many societies, that is so. And and in that way, it hits much harder from an emotional standpoint. And
Mm,
and because of that, people, your go-to is self-judgment and shame. What did I do wrong?
mm,
I'll never have a good relationship again. And
yep.
so we do a lot of negative internal pecking, which is, for this season we're in, it is extremely self-defeating when
Mm,
we should be trying to offer ourselves some self-compassion
and kindness. Yeah.
and kindness.
Yeah.
But we don't recognize the importance of doing this for ourselves. And some of the things we tell ourselves, we definitely wouldn't tell our friends.
Yeah, absolutely. You touched on your clients and healing. So you talk about healing not from beginning, no, healing not beginning when someone apologizes. How did you come to that realization, and how did that shift your own healing?
In my case specifically, what I found was my then husband had become very volatile, which that was something that was really unexpected.
Yeah.
And because my kids were young, I made a decision that I would allow him to visit whenever he wanted. I didn't want to ever get involved in parental alienation.
Mm-hmm.
And also because they were so young, I didn't want them being dragged around. And he was going through a period of instability. And also, oftentimes I didn't know where he was living. So I was very concerned about that. But sometimes when he came, I often felt that it was less about visiting the children, but more to see what was happening in my life.
Mm,
And sometimes when a partner sees that life seemed to be moving on without them and despite them, it creates anger.
mm-hmm.
And so he became verbally, I would say, verbally abusive because a lot of what was said was unnecessary and it reflected the emotional hurt that he himself had inflicted on himself because I did not break the
Mm,
relationship. He was the one who took the decision. So I didn't want to live with baggage. That's something I always laugh and say to people, I'm not very small. I'm well built. And can you imagine me walking around with a 50-pound suitcase or something like that? So I felt the need to lighten and to unburden
mm,
because if you're going to sustain young children, it's draining physically,
yeah.
it's draining emotionally. So you have got to lighten your load so that you can be self-sustaining in order to be there for them in a healthy and meaningful way. So I was driven
Mm,
to the healing process
mm.
from that perspective.
Yeah. Would you say that, again, with his anger towards you, a defining moment when you said that to yourself, I deserve peace? Was that one of the
Oh,
defining moments?
Oh, absolutely.
Mm,
I deserved peace. And what I also decided was that I just wouldn't engage. That
yeah.
was really a decision I came to. I am not going to engage. He can come and he can visit them. And when he's
Mm,
done, he can go. But I basically minimized all of my communication because looking back again, had I taken an opposite response, there is no doubt that there could have been escalation.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And again, to put your children first, for their relationship with their father, that's very, again, it's a selfless act from your perspective, considering you were getting negative energy from your ex at the time for something
Mhm.
that you didn't cause. So it's very unfortunate that you had to go through that experience, but there's reasons why we go through these experiences, and you're a living person who's experienced that to help others today. So you've touched on your faith. So, how did your faith guide you through the grief and the uncertainty?
Okay, so my faith was really through just talking to God. Each and every one of us, depending on what we believe, if you're a Christian, you have a straight line to him. So you
Mm,
don't need any intermediary and you can talk to him anytime. And you can also just pray. Prayer
yeah.
is that communication that you can have with him any time of day, any time of night. And I found in my case, it was really sustaining me,
Mm,
really, really sustaining and uplifting me in a way that I would never have imagined had I not leaned in the way that I leaned into my
mm,
faith.
yeah. And is that something that helped you? Because you went from simply surviving to help other women thrive. Was faith a big part of that?
What I learned along my own journey as I went through the process of healing and got out on the other side, something I actually told myself while I was going through the healing. I promised myself that neither myself or my children would come out of this worst off,
Mm,
especially in terms of opportunity for their personal growth and their academic growth and all of that, because I was always big on education.
yeah.
And the people who I had seen as I observed growing up were the people who had a good educational foundation that they could lean into it, and
Yeah.
it was a source of upward mobility and professional development. So I had already been socialized in that same manner.
Mm,
So that was also another pillar in my personal walk that I was pulling on.
mm,
And I remember saying to myself when you walked out and I realized I was standing on my two legs, me and the two children, I said to myself, because I did a lot of self-talking, I said, well, by then I had a bachelor's degree and I said, well, this little piece of paper is going to do a lot of work
mm,
because if I didn't have it, we would have been starving.
mm,
So I committed at that time also that I would ensure my plan to go to graduate school that would come to fruition.
yeah.
And so that in fact happened much later because you have to take the strides in your life. As I say, I take them in bite-sized pieces and not gulps. Because when you are raising young children, you always have to make sure that emotionally you are at an optimal level
Yeah.
because kids pull on your emotional resources more than any other of your resources.
Mm,
And so that was important to me.
yeah.
And looking ahead as to how my growth could also feed into the aspirations that I had for them. And so as life went on and the opportunity arose, I got a chance to go to graduate school in the UK. I was in Jamaica living at the time because I am Jamaican.
Mm-hmm.
And off we went to Scotland to a completely new experience culturally
Mm,
and weather as well.
mm,
But I always remember my arrival there. In fact, even before that plane lifted from Jamaica, I felt such a weight as
mm,
I boarded that plane with my two children. It was as if I don't know how many pounds had fallen off of me. And it
yeah.
was the emotional weight of negotiating with, because by this I had a third child from a long-term relationship.
Mm-hmm.
However, there was always a struggle
Yeah.
to get my ex-husband by now, to get him to emotionally engage and to be consistent in his responsibilities.
Mm.
And the father of my third child, while he was more emotionally engaged, he too was not very forthcoming with child support.
Mm.
So I almost saw, while there were different personalities in the way they approached their parenting, for me, there was an emotional weight that I just needed relief from. And
Mm.
that relief came when I boarded that plane, and it became even greater when I arrived in Scotland and said I could breathe a deep breath. Oh my God, a new life.
Yeah. What a journey. Moving countries, three young children, starting education again. What does life look like now for you compared to those early days?
In Scotland, here's what I would say. I was living my life with a certain degree of doing it afraid,
Mm.
but I was now living with faith-filled eyes and not a fear-filled heart. Because
Mm.
while I'm plodding along and doing it, I was doing it with a certain level of fear and saying, how is this going to happen? But I kept putting one foot in front of the other because I was determined to come out on the other side and to ensure that my children
Mm.
got the quality of life and education that I wanted them to get in a developed country.
Mm. And now you're helping others heal themselves from your experience, lived experience and wisdom. Can you share a story of one of your clients that reminds you why this work matters so much?
Certainly, I have met and or have had clients who have had the same exact struggles.
Mm.
Partners who are not pulling their weight, partners who are volatile and often violent. And when I talk about violence, I want people to know that it's on a continuum. So in the co-parenting space, it goes from physical intimidation, threats through messages, but also there is actually murders taking place in the
Mm.
co-parenting space. And people are often shocked when I say this, but I give examples of at least three that I know of. And two of them had to do with the court awarding um, shared custody to the partners.
Yeah.
And one person was so angry that he agreed to meet in a supermarket parking lot. And when the father of the children arrived, the 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 the, the father of the other co-parent pulled out a gun and killed him on the spot.
Yeah.
And his daughter was sitting in the car. There was another one where the boyfriend of the ex-wife shot the father of the children when he came to pick up the kids, having been awarded, I can't remember if it was full custody or shared custody. There is another, the mom lets the dad in the house to visit this baby, and she goes to another room. You're not expecting your ex to throw your baby through the window, and that's another murder. So women cope, and I've found this, they cope with varying degrees of violence in these relationships. And so they often have to be on the watch out for the responses. And I often say to people, do not feel badly if you have to appoint a proxy. Sometimes it may
Mm,
have to be your own mom, a family friend, a trusted mentor, because depending on the level of healing that's going on both sides, the emotional volatility is so high and
mm,
so unstable that oftentimes it is better for you to have somebody who is completely neutral. In
mm,
fact, I had to give this advice to a family friend. In fact, it's my sister-in-law. I said to her when there was a first separation between her son and his wife, and I said to her, please go to every handover and make sure you are the one handing over the children because there was just so much animosity and volatility at that time.
mm,
And I was just terrified that some physical harm was going to come to someone.
mm,
So that is something that shows up a lot in the co-parenting space and relationships
yeah,
that is not talked about as much and is not addressed.
yeah,
But more and more partners have to be on the lookout for these symptoms
mm,
because it is a problem and it can be damaging to everyone and
yeah,
not just little damage, long-term damage,
yeah,
because when a parent is murdered or, you know, harmed physically, that story is going to live on with the
yeah.
children.
Yeah. And I know for our listeners out there, it doesn't matter what country you're in, we've all heard those stories. And when you look at that emotional volatility, that can cause people to do some awful
Hmm.
things. So I'm sure there's a few listeners out there understanding where you're coming from.
Hmm.
But for our listeners going through a breakup or a divorce, what's the very first step towards reclaiming their power?
Your first step towards reclaiming your power is to find your place of healing and pursue
Mhm.
it. And I'll also say there are probably four basic principles that I think should be the focus of every co-parenting relationship.
Mhm.
Shared parenting. My advice is focus on communication rather than legislation. So communicate. But again, this is difficult. So I recommend communication counseling for couples. You don't have to go together. That's not what I'm advocating at all. What I'm advocating is that you need a new language of communication with your ex because you are no longer lovers, you are caregivers to your children.
Mm,
And so you need a kind of team speak that respects the input of both parents. And you were not operating in that vein before. So this is something you now have to go and learn
mm,
because you don't want your children to see you operating from a place of division and animosity.
mm,
So this is a new way of living and communicating. You're establishing a new ethos of communication in the family. Also, do not run off 100 miles. Stay in as much as it is possible within a 20 to 30-minute drive from each other.
mm,
Children like yourself, they have built a community, a school district, co-curricular activities, friendships. And so they don't want to be torn away from that because what you're doing is disempowering their own personal growth and social connections, which you don't want to do.
mm,
So, um, those are some of the very
mm,
important ones. And the final one, I would say, the four core ones, no bad mouthing of either parent in the presence of the children. Because we fail to realize that, okay, we didn't get along, But those children know that this is my dad and this is my mom, and I'm half of each and every one of them. And so when they hear either parent denigrating, it can be painful.
Mm,
It's a different thing if the children are infants, but they grow up, and if you continue this practice, they are going to recognize it. And it is also for them, it will affect their self-esteem because
mm,
they are a product of both parents. So those are four core values and practices that every co-parent should aspire to. Bad
mm,
mouthing should be to your therapist or your coach, but not to your children.
yeah,
So those are definitely four core practices
yeah,
that are foundational to a very neutral and civil co-parenting relationship.
yeah. And I'm sure a lot of listeners out there are taking those four core values on and yeah, and will apply them to their way of living and co-parenting if they're having struggles in their space. So you've also say healing isn't a destination but a daily decision. What does that look like in real life?
Okay, so you get to a point, healing happens in stages. And so you get to a point where when you know that you are really, really at the probably at the end of the journey, is when you are no longer triggered by that co-parent. If there is a restaurant that you used to go and celebrate with your anniversary, birthdays, wherever, when you drive past there, it's no longer a trigger. If there's a special dish that you used to cook for the person and you can now cook it without it being a trigger, I remember one of my clients saying to me, um, I don't want any kale cooked, no kale, because this kale reminds me of that person. So when whatever your kale is, when you have no problem with cooking kale in your house, that means that trigger is no longer there.
Mm-hmm.
And I must also say, many people struggle with how to handle the extended family and the
Yeah.
in-laws.
Yes.
If you had a good relationship with your extended family, his or yours, do not bring them into the struggle that you are having. Keep Put a boundary around that so that they are not asked or called in to be either a referee or to
Mm,
have an opinion because you want to maintain the neutrality of that relationship for your kids. You still want your kids to go to the birthday parties, the Christmas parties, grandma and grandpa's family dinner, whatever it is. And when you outpour and downpour the negatives, people shrink back. So I would say to preserve that extended family for
mm,
your kids,
yeah.
avoid avoid entangling them
Yeah.
in the nuts and bolts of what
Yeah.
didn't happen and what happened.
Yeah, that's wise advice, Clover. Very wise advice there. You don't want to get that all entangled because it can get very, very messy very quickly. So, how can women co-parent successfully with someone who is emotionally unavailable?
Okay, so what you have to do is you have to make a decision as to what are my resources, what are the resources that I'm getting, and how can I use these to sustain my children in the best way I know
Mm,
how and to meet their needs. Something we need to recognize, you have no control over what is happening on the side of the other co-parent. The only control you have is over your own space and the relationship that you have with your kids.
hmm
One of my suggestions to my clients and to anyone in general who is struggling, use the family apps. I don't want to name because I'm not promoting, but there are several family apps out there that
Hmm.
you can use that provide every kind of information that the co-parent needs. School activities, the entire schedule for the semester. Um, some of them even allow you to share expenditure and purchases. So there is no need for you to be having a back and forth and a bickering
Mm.
with the other person
Yeah,
because there's been a lot of growth in the space in terms of the support mechanisms that you have. And so the family apps are one way and a very significant and comprehensive way in which you can have information sharing about everything that pertains to your child, from the issues of health, the issues of school, school schedules, co-curricular
yeah,
activities, payments, and expenditure.
wonderful. Great, great advice there. I'm sure there'll be a few listeners looking those up. So, Clover, where can people connect with you and your work?
Okay, so I am on Instagram as Clover the Co-Parenting Coach. I'm also on Facebook, recovering from the loss of my group and my original profile, but I'm building back. I also have a YouTube channel.
Hmm.
And so my email as well is johnston.clover@gmail.com, but you can send me a DM either from Facebook or from Instagram.
Wonderful.
And before we wrap up, I would just like to give this final word of encouragement. It's better to be prepared for an opportunity and not have one than have an opportunity and not be prepared. Whenever we are never able to anticipate breakup, sometimes, but not always. Keep your focus on how you can grow and develop both personally and professionally to become the very best version of yourselves so that you can be the best mom to your child and also because your children will grow up and you do not want to look back and say, what if I had done? You don't want to look back with regret. And there are
Mhm.
so many opportunities and options now for self-development and up-leveling. The internet has opened a whole new world for us.
Yeah.
So success is one of the best forms of revenge.
Wonderful advice, Clover. I'm sure people are listening and taking on your wisdom and reflecting on what's happening in their life and seeing how they can tackle things in a different way. So, Clover, thank you for reminding us that while we can't always choose the storms, we can choose how to rise above them. Your story is proof that healing is possible, peace is worth fighting for, and our next chapter can be more beautiful than we ever imagined. Thank you very much, Clover. This,
Thank you for having me.
you're welcome. Our pleasure. This is Positive Vibes with Nicki Dennis. Until next time, take the step, choose the peace, and never stop believing in your own comeback. Sending you all love and positive vibes. Bye for now.